A lot of people think raising their vibration means adding something new to their life, a new routine, a new meditation, a new affirmation, a new book on the nightstand, a new practice that promises to finally make everything feel lighter. And listen, none of those things are wrong. Sometimes a quiet morning, a candle, a breath, or a sentence repeated with sincerity can open a door inside you. But there's a strange thing that happens when you keep adding beautiful things on top of an inner life that's still carrying old emotional weight. The room gets prettier, but it doesn't get freer. Because sometimes the problem isn't that you need more light. Sometimes the problem is that you're still holding on to things that block it. Not obvious things, not cruel habits, not addictions you can easily point at and say, yes, that's the issue. The hardest patterns to release are usually the ones that look noble from the outside. They look kind, they look loyal, they look generous, they look emotionally mature. People may even praise you for them, and because they're praised, you start to mistake them for your personality, maybe even your soul. But a cage made of gold is still a cage, and some of the traits you've been calling good might actually be the very things keeping you locked in a lower state of being. Not because goodness is bad, but because performance is heavy, control is heavy, over-explaining is heavy, loving someone's potential more than their reality is heavy. So the path upward isn't always about becoming more spiritual. Sometimes it's about becoming more honest, more stripped down, more willing to ask, is this really love? Or is this fear wearing a clean shirt? There's a version of you that learned how to survive by being easy to approve of. Maybe you don't call it survival. Maybe you call it being considerate, being polite, being mature, being understanding. But if you look closely, you might notice how much energy goes into managing how others experience you. You soften your truth so nobody feels uncomfortable. You say yes before your body even gets a chance to say no. You laugh when something stings. You stay calm when you're actually boiling inside. And later, when you're alone, your nervous system finally tells the truth. Being kind is beautiful, but needing to be perceived as kind can quietly drain the life out of you. There's a difference. Real kindness comes from freedom. Performed kindness comes from fear. One says, I care about you. The other says, please don't reject me. One has warmth. The other has tension behind the eyes. And people can feel the difference, even if they don't know how to name it. You've probably felt it too, when someone was smiling but not really present, agreeing but secretly resentful, helping but silently keeping score. Somewhere along the way, you may have learned that being good kept you safe. Maybe goodness made the house quieter. Maybe goodness earned you affection. Maybe goodness helped you avoid criticism from people who could only love you when you were convenient. So now, as an adult, disappointing someone can feel like danger. A simple boundary can feel like betrayal. Saying, I can't do that, can feel like you've committed a crime. But notice the trap. If your peace depends on everyone believing you're good, then anyone's disappointment becomes a leash around your spirit. Higher vibration doesn't mean becoming sweet all the time. It means becoming true. Sometimes truth is gentle. Sometimes truth has edges. Sometimes truth says, I love you, but no. Sometimes truth walks away without writing a 10-page defense for why it had to leave. A person who is grounded in real goodness doesn't need to advertise it. They don't need to be understood as the nice one in every room. They can be loving without being available for everything. They can be honest without being cruel. They can disappoint someone and still remain connected to their own heart. And that's where freedom begins. Not when everyone approves of you, but when your soul no longer collapses without their approval. And once that begins to happen, something strange shifts. You stop giving your energy away to imaginary courtrooms in other people's minds. You stop preparing speeches for people who have already decided to misunderstand you. You stop polishing your mask. A quieter kind of integrity starts to appear, not loud, not dramatic, just steady, like a candle that doesn't panic when the room gets dark. After you stop performing goodness, you may notice another pattern hiding underneath it. The need to be useful, not just helpful, useful, needed, essential. The person people come to when everything falls apart. The one with advice, comfort, solutions, emotional bandages, emergency wisdom, and somehow enough patience to carry burdens that were never yours to carry. On the outside, this looks compassionate, and sometimes it is. But sometimes, if you're honest, helping becomes the place where you hide from yourself. There's a certain kind of exhaustion that comes from always being the healer in the room. It's not normal tiredness. It's deeper than that. It feels like your own life is waiting in the hallway while you sit inside everyone else's crisis. You know their wounds, their patterns, their triggers, their childhood stories, their relationship cycles. You can explain their behavior with shocking accuracy. But when it comes to your own emptiness, your own fear, your own quiet ache at 2 a.m., suddenly everything gets blurry. So you go back to helping, because helping gives you a role, and roles can feel safer than silence. But love doesn't always rescue. Sometimes love trusts. Sometimes love stands nearby without grabbing the steering wheel. Think of a seed in the soil. If you dig it up every morning to check whether it's growing, you don't help it. You interrupt the very process you're trying to support. People are like that too. Some struggles need air, time, consequences, and inner confrontation. When you keep saving someone from every discomfort, you may accidentally steal the lesson their soul was trying to learn. And yes, that's uncomfortable to admit, because rescuing can feel so noble. But control often dresses itself in the language of care. There's a painful question underneath this pattern. Who are you when nobody needs you? Not who are you when you're praised for being strong. Not who are you when someone says, "I don't know what I'd do without you." Who are you when the phone is quiet, when no one is asking for advice, when there's no emotional fire to put out? For many people, that question feels almost unbearable. Because being needed became proof of worth. Being useful became proof of love. And without that, the soul has to face an old fear. Maybe I'm not valuable unless I'm holding everything together. Real service comes from fullness. It has clean hands. It doesn't cling. It doesn't secretly demand dependency. It doesn't make someone else's healing a personal project. When your vibration rises, your help becomes more spacious. You can listen without immediately fixing. You can care without absorbing. You can say, "I'm here with you," without making their pain your identity. And oddly, people may feel more supported by your presence than they ever did by your solutions. Because presence says, "I trust your strength." Rescue says, "I don't." That shift changes everything. You begin to understand that love is not measured by how much of yourself you abandon. Compassion doesn't require self-erasure. A lighthouse doesn't run into the ocean to drag every ship to shore. It stands firm, it shines, it guides, and the ships still have to move. Once you stop trying to be good for everyone and stop trying to rescue everyone, a deeper hunger often rises to the surface, the need to be understood. Maybe this one is familiar. Maybe you've spent entire conversations explaining yourself until your throat felt tired and your heart felt smaller. You tried one angle, then another. You gave context. You softened your tone. You searched for the perfect sentence that would finally make someone say, "Now I see you." And when they didn't, something inside you sank. Being misunderstood can feel incredibly lonely, not just annoying, lonely, especially if you grew up in places where your feelings were dismissed, where your perception was questioned, where your inner world was treated like an inconvenience. So now, when someone doesn't get you, it doesn't feel like a simple disagreement. It can feel like being erased, like you have to fight your way back into existence with explanations. But here's the quiet truth. If someone else has to understand your experience before you're allowed to trust it, then your inner world is living on borrowed ground. Your soul was never meant to stand trial in every conversation. You don't need to keep presenting evidence for your pain, your choices, your boundaries, your intuition, or your timing. Some people won't understand because they can't. Some won't understand because understanding you would require them to look at themselves. Some won't understand because they benefit from your confusion. And some simply live in a different inner weather. You can describe rain to someone who has only known deserts, but at a certain point, your description won't make them wet. This doesn't mean you become cold. It doesn't mean you stop communicating. Honest communication is still sacred. But there's a difference between sharing and begging to be validated. Sharing says, "Here's what's true for me." Begging says, "Please agree that my truth is real." One opens a door, the other places your nervous system in someone else's hands. And if that person is careless, distracted, defensive, or emotionally unavailable, your whole center begins to shake. Higher consciousness feels like being able to stand inside your own knowing without applause. You can be misunderstood and still remain intact. You can explain once, maybe twice if the connection matters, but you no longer bleed yourself dry, trying to make someone enter a room inside you they refuse to visit. A beautiful kind of dignity appears when you stop chasing comprehension from people who aren't capable of offering it. You stop shouting across locked doors. You stop confusing being unseen with being unreal. And as this self-trust grows, your relationships change. Some people will feel relieved because they never wanted you to perform in the first place. They wanted the real you, not the defended, over-explained version. Others may feel threatened. They were used to your uncertainty. They were used to you returning again and again, trying to prove that your feelings made sense. When you stop doing that, the dynamic loses its fuel. And what remains is simple. Either they meet you with respect, or they don't. Either way, you stay with yourself. After self-trust starts to take root, your eyes become clearer, and that clarity can be painful, because suddenly you begin to notice how often you've been loving people who aren't actually there. Not literally, of course. Their body is there, their voice is there, their promises may be there. But the version of them you're emotionally attached to lives mostly in your imagination. The healed version, the accountable version. The version who finally understands what they did. The version who stops running, stops lying, stops disappearing, stops choosing the same wound over and over again. Loving potential feels noble. It feels patient. It feels spiritual even. You tell yourself, I can see the good in them, and maybe you can. Maybe there really is goodness there. Maybe there are moments when their softness shows through, just enough to keep you hoping. But potential is not presence. Potential is not consistency. Potential is not repair. A seed can become a tree, yes, but you cannot build a house in the shade of a seed. You cannot rest under branches that haven't grown. Many people stay trapped here because accepting reality would require grief. Not small grief, real grief. The kind that makes you sit quietly and admit, the person I've been waiting for may never arrive. And that hurts because you're not only letting go of someone, you're letting go of the story you built around them, the future conversations, the apology, the breakthrough, the day they finally choose you properly, the day they become who you always believed they could be. There's a tenderness in that hope, and nobody should mock it. Hope is human. But when hope becomes a blindfold, it stops being love and starts becoming self-abandonment. A higher vibration doesn't make you less loving. It makes your love more truthful. You stop confusing empathy with denial. You stop using someone's wounds as an excuse to ignore their behavior. You stop saying, they're just hurt, when the honest sentence is, they are hurting me. Both can be true. Someone can have a painful past and still be responsible for how they treat you. Someone can have potential and still be unsafe for your nervous system. Someone can be worthy of compassion and still not belong in your life. Clarity is one of the cleanest energies you can carry. It doesn't scream. It doesn't punish. It doesn't need revenge. It simply sees. And once you see, you can choose. Not based on fantasy. Not based on who they might become after 5 more years of your patience. Not based on the rare good moments that keep you emotionally hooked. Based on what is actually happening now. How do they show up now? How do they repair now? How do they treat your heart now? How do you feel in your body around them now? When you begin choosing from reality instead of potential, your whole energy field changes. You stop leaking life force into imagined futures. You stop living in emotional waiting rooms. You stop mistaking longing for loyalty, and slowly, you make room for people who don't need to be imagined into decency. People whose love has weight, shape, and action. People who meet you in the present, not in some distant someday.